There's a lot of talk lately that Web3 culture is dying, but it's far more complicated than that.
I'm John.
I'm Rob.
And this is the Mid-One Podcast,
where we talk all things Web3 and the rise of blockchain gaming.
So Rob, is Web3 culture dying?
As I just said, it's more complicated than that, John. Let's get into it. Can we keep that?
Okay, before we get into it, if you're on YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe. If you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, a 5-star podcast review would be great. And you can follow us on Twitter at Mint1Pod. So, Rob, this episode was your suggestion. So, do you want to go into what we're talking about today? So, I wish I could find this post. I've looked for it for 2 weeks now. Cannot find it. I mean, not 2 weeks straight. I've put like maybe 5 minutes into it total, but every now and again I try and find it, can't find it. It wasn't someone in my network on LinkedIn, but it was someone connected to me through someone else. And they wrote this small, it was a reasonably sized post, and it was discussing Web3 culture, which has been such a big part of crypto, NFTs, gaming, everything. Every ecosystem had its own microculture. This Web3 culture was like its identity. It was core to it. And the post was basically saying that Web3 culture is dying and will soon be fully dead. But it's not doing the boring, like, oh, NFTs are dead kind of rubbish. It was a far more nuanced point than that. And I really liked it. And I want to discuss it more. And I wish, if I ever find the post, we'll put it in the show notes. But essentially what he was saying is Web3 culture worked so well because it was kind of the opposite of something. Like most cultures need to be in opposition to something. Not always, but it needs some sort of opposition, some sort of friction working against it. And as blockchain technology and as NFTs become more useful and more integrated into daily life, and we start to forget any of the difficulties we had seeing them integrated and, you know, the reactions they got, there isn't going to be anything for the Web3 culture to cling on to. It's just the stuff that works, the good stuff, is just going to be stuff that you see every day. Like, it's not going to be anything special. And then the stuff that, like the scammy stuff, that's just going to be just scams. Everything's going to go into boxes that already exist. And there isn't really going to be anything contesting it. It's like, the best example I could think of was when the internet first came about. I kind of missed the very start, but I was there early enough that I know some of this. There was a sort of culture around people who were using the internet and online all the time, and people that weren't connected to the internet anyway, and you'd be in these chat rooms, and that's when things like BRB, LOL, those little things, they were born then, and they became a little bit like, To the Moon and stuff like that. That was kind of the internet era's version of that, which, has persisted to this day. But there was a sort of internet culture. And to be fair, there still is, but it's so big and broad now that it's kind of just culture. It is like mainstream culture. But it started off as like a smaller side thing, like you might get with a new genre of music or something. It was like its own little ecosystem, and it gradually grew until it started to overtake the rest of the world, and now it's just everywhere. Yep. And at least this is how I take the guy's point, was that's just going to happen to Web3. We're just going to bleed. It's going to bleed into normal life, and then it's just, there isn't going to be this hardcore Web3 culture. And I've been thinking a lot about that. Is that a good thing? Is it true? I think it probably is true, but is it a good thing? Is Web3 culture in general a positive or a negative? Some people see it as really alienating. And I had a meeting this week actually discussing Web3 projects, and they said that Web3, this is so ironic as well, Web3 seemed like a walled garden. Which is the most ironic statement, given that the whole premise of Web3 is kind of like the borderless approach. And so, yes, this episode, I just kind of want to discuss Web3 culture, where it's going, if it's going to continue to exist, and our feelings on it. So that's my opening monologue. What are your feelings on Web3 culture? Well, speaking from the culture point of view, I think there's a lot of parallels between the early days of the internet and the early days of blockchain tech, and then the NFT craze that popped up a couple of years ago. I think if we go all the way back to kind of the birth of blockchain, it was created as this antithesis to banking. This distrust of the financial systems after what happened in 2008, and this need for something that's independent of control, independent of governments and the financial institutions that were already there in the world. So it kind of started as this counterculture movement, and I don't know if the internet way back in the day was seen as counterculture. I'm far too young to have any knowledge.
I knew that was coming. I set myself up for it, to be fair.
But yeah, a little bit. But it's especially blockchain in its modern day very much was, and it's strange that barely 12, 13 years after this birth of a new industry, we've gone from vehemently counterculture and, wanting to be independent of everything to now very much wanting to be a part of the mainstream and wanting to work with governments and banks and other mainstays that everyone else is used to. And I think culture is one of those things that, at least in my eyes, is going to fall by the wayside as kind of a victim of that. Way back in the day, and again, it's not like I experienced this, but from what I've heard and read and understand, the people that were the early adopters of the internet did come up with phrases like LOL and BRB and, text speak and stuff. And the everyday person in the street would be like, well, what is this? It's gibberish. And then ever so slowly, internet speak got amalgamated into what everyday people know and understand. And I feel that some Web3 terminology and some Web3 phrases and terms have begun to become assimilated into everyday speak. I think it was it last year or the year before where NFT was like Colin's word of the year. And then now Web3 is a term that's now, I wouldn't say widely understood, but widely used and known. Yeah. And there's this assimilation of culture, of what was once a niche culture into what is now the everyday. When you started making your point, I was thinking about kind of the very passionate cultures that popped up around the Wax blockchain and VV and Polygon and Immutable and all these different chains and projects back in the day. It wasn't too long ago that Polygon and Immutable were seen as a war. It was two people looking to capture the same market share in a very competitive industry, and then all of a sudden they're working together and everyone's hunky-dory. And way back when I started getting involved in the Wax blockchain, and there's this very passionate kind of distrust and anger between the Wax and the VV communities that wasn't helped by particular individuals saying that particular chains are a crock of shit. But anyway, and it seems like nowadays there's much less of that discourse, whether that's because there's far less people going to war on either side, or whether it's just because the industry as a whole has matured and grown. I'm not sure. But it does seem that we're going the way of these very close-knit communities kind of fading away a little, which is a shame, but is it just a sign of us becoming a part of the mainstream now?
Yeah, so you mentioned something just before we come on air, and I stopped you because I wanted to talk about it on air, but you said that, I think you kind of prompted a thought in me. You were talking about the culture becoming mainstream, and I said that I think that's pretty singular. I haven't thought this all through, but it feels unusual for what started as a counterculture to yearn to become the mainstream. So I think it's with the internet and gaming as well, which I'm going to come back to. It was originally perhaps not counterculture, but it was a subculture. It was its own little bubble, and I think the companies that were investing heavily in it, that were building it, they wanted to be mainstream. Obviously, the top wanted to be mainstream. I'd say that's probably true for most of crypto. Obviously, Bitcoin was created without that in mind. It was meant to run in complete opposition to modern banking. So perhaps the vision from Satoshi was never to integrate any real banks. But the users itself, when you're part of a culture, part of a subculture or a counterculture, I don't think you yearn to be mainstream. Like that seems an unusual want. And yet that's exactly what Web3 was. Like all we've ever talked about is, oh, imagine if the bank started doing this, or imagine if Sony did this. And everything I've said has basically happened. Like I remember saying about, oh, imagine if Sony started working on their own blockchain technology and then they released those patents. Imagine if banks had Bitcoin ETFs. Is happening. Like everything we thought was kind of outlandish has happened, and we all yearned for it. The thing is that the more mainstream adoption we get, the less identity Web3 has. And I should point out, we have a podcast on Web3. so it may have a shelf life, but we have to pivot.
Maybe. But I mean, drawing another parallel to countercultures, I've been a metalhead my entire life. I associate with the goths and the emos and all of those people that dye their hair. And I mean, I'm wearing a hat. But,
you do dye your
hair. That's very much me. But I wouldn't say that people of that subculture necessarily want to be part of the mainstream. It's very much the opposite.
Exactly.
Any mainstream brand or personality that tries to lean into it by making merch that vaguely leans on that subculture is pounded on. It's like, oh, we hate this stuff. Why are you trying to be one of us? And it's very odd that we are taking a very much the direct opposite approach with the assimilation of Web3 into the mainstream. And all of this is kind of endemic, or at least from my point of view, of an industry that's always yearned for legitimacy. And I think it started becoming more so that way when the first blockchain games were starting to come to prominence. There was very much this, we'll be able to build something that's on par with what you'll see, or on par or surpass what you'll see on console, or these AAA games you get on PC. And obviously these games would never, or were not living up to that mantra, but there was very much this push to associate all of these new exciting ideas that were being built around the established quality that people had come to expect. And yes, a lot of it I think was hype cycles, but I think this situation we're in now, where we're talking about culture as something that's ebbing away, is kind of a result of us trying to, well, not us, but particular people in the industry trying to grab onto this legitimacy on things that just flagrantly were not legitimate. And then we end up in a situation today where some of these words and phrases that those projects were using are now starting to be picked up by other people and assimilated in other ways. So it's a very odd turn of events to go from 2-3 years ago, these first projects yearning for legitimacy, primarily from people that had no interest in actually being legitimate, to today where, as a collective, I think the majority of people within the Web3 community are very much no longer the counterculture folk. We're very much of the mind that this technology, or some of these projects, products, processes, whatever it is of use to wider society. Whether it is or not, up for debate. But I think we'd probably both agree that the technology as a whole probably has some benefit to the wider world. Quite exactly where that is and in what form it takes is still up for debate. But there's still the hope there, which is what everyone wants to grasp onto.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the technology is integrating pretty nicely into various areas. I wonder if there's perhaps a difference between Web3 folk and crypto folk. There's obviously a lot of overlap. I think it's kind of a Venn diagram, but I wonder if there is a difference in that. And also, I'm not sure I can think of an industry that started less legitimately than crypto. I mean, given the first uses of Bitcoin basically propped up Silk Road. So it took a long while for it to shed that reputation for being shady underworld. I mean, I remember I think I wrote an article in like 2021 about was it Chainalysis or Messari report, where they tried to trace as many crimes to crypto as they could and then compare it to fiat currencies. And the difference was wild. People thought that crypto would be involved in illicit activities at a far higher degree than fiat currencies, and it was nowhere near. I mean, nowhere near. That fiat currencies were being used in huge quantities for crime, and Bitcoin, which could be traced. I mean, if you catch a criminal with Bitcoin, you can see its whole history. You can't do that with a banknote. You can trace it exactly where it's been. So it's far easier to trace it, and yet still it didn't have anywhere near that. So we've had this reputational issue for a long, long time, and it wasn't really an issue when people didn't want to be. It was counterculture. Bitcoin was counterculture. When people were just using it, a lot of the people in the early days of Bitcoin were using it to buy and sell whatever they could. They just wanted to use it constantly. They weren't hoarding it. There was no hodling, which is another example. They were using it because that was the purpose. There's a person who a friend of mine knows, and he's in the Michael Lewis book about SPF that's just come out. A guy called Zane, who's been around since the early days, like 2013, 14 is when he started working in crypto. And he used to pay for everything with Bitcoin. Like he was not interested in, I mean, he probably held a lot and he made a lot of money, but he was spending it. Would you buy a pizza with Bitcoin right now? No. There's no chance, no shot. Because I'll just be constantly thinking, what if in 10 years I just pay £400 for a pizza? I'd always be thinking that. But it's a strange journey, but I think probably the crypto folk were less, I don't know actually, because although they didn't want it to be mainstream to begin with, once Bitcoin caught some wind and started rising and they realized how much money they had, like people in the early Bitcoin days were making fortunes the more mainstream it became. So it has, for most of crypto's life, it has been trying to become more mainstream while its identity is tied up in being anti-mainstream in many ways. And like the person said on the meeting, it was a walled garden, and still sometimes it is, where which is linked to the tribalism we've talked about between ecosystems, where, like, do you remember you mentioned VV and Wax? Those two communities had zero overlap. They were working for similar goals, and they wanted the same things, and yet they were just, I mean, at loggerheads 24/7. And it was true of most places. And I think it was really probably Ripple that started pushing crypto towards legitimacy. And then, as you say, with the games that have been coming out, we've just been seeing more legitimate examples of blockchain use. And this is where I think that the mystery man on LinkedIn is completely right about the trajectory of Web3 culture, which is it kind of peaked with the all-time highs. And now I don't think, I still think there'll be another bull run. I think it's probably further away than people realize, but let's just presume there will be another bull run. I don't think Web3 culture will look anything like it did in 2021.
No.
Which is weird. Like, that's weird, right?
Yeah, it is very strange. Although I think it's tied to the people that create that culture. I think we've kind of done an inverse bell curve in terms of the people that are within the blockchain / Web3, not to my mic, blockchain / Web3 space. Because way back in the day, it was, very technologically minded folk who could understand the Bitcoin white paper and had to know what they were doing, otherwise you couldn't really get involved in Bitcoin at all. You know, you had to be very technologically minded. And then we went through the kind of 2019 to 2021, where a lot of people with a lot less technological knowledge came into the space, but leaned on the ideas and the foundations that all of the technologically minded people had come up with before them, and then used them as, a jumping pad to create mostly scams and projects and all this kind of thing. And now, because the money isn't in the space, all of those people that are trying to make a quick buck are no longer here, but we're seeing a new influx of people that do have the technical knowledge. And, developers and visionaries and the people that are creating, new games, usually jumping across from established game studios and from other industries into Web3 because they realize or have noticed a potential use for this technology and want to be one of the people that builds it. So it seems that way back in the day there was a culture, but it was a brand new thing. It was a very small amount of people. So of course, if you've got a tight-knit group, there's going to be culture there. And then it exploded into a lot of people that didn't have technological prowess. So what they just did is talk a lot. Yep. If you talk a lot, then you're going to come up with some things that get spread around and that people pick up. And where we are today is with a lot more technologically minded people again. So, they're not people that get spend all day sitting in Discord or on Twitter just typing out memes and all this kind of thing. They're actually focused on building what they perceive to be valuable for the future. So we're not seeing as many of, these Twitter accounts that... I went through my Twitter follow list on my personal Twitter not too long ago, and a lot of the accounts I followed back in, 21, 22 that were posting every single day are just dead. They've disappeared. Yeah. And... it does give the space a little more of an air of legitimacy. Now there's not so many scams running around, but it seems you can't really catch a break if you look at the mainstream news, because of course we're all just talking about SBF is now in jail and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it does give time for the legitimate people to build, which is kind of what we need. But I do agree. I think if we do have another bull run, I'm kind of 50-50 on whether we will have one. It will look very, very different, both from how many people are actively using the technology and also from a culture point of view. I don't think there's going to be anywhere near as much of this brigading or walling off of particular blockchains or chains or any of this. It should, fingers crossed, hopefully be much more of an open forum in that respect.
Yeah, well, I agree. And I think part of the reason another bull run would look completely different is the success cases are completely different right now to how they've always been. If you look at the games, and let's just look at games because it's what we know the most about. So if you look at Axie Infinity was, an incredible arc and incredible to see what it did, who it affected, how it came to prominence, and it was loud. Like everyone was talking about it. There was documentaries. Every major, I bet you, if you go on everything from BBC News, Sky News, New York Times, if you type in Axie Infinity, I bet you find stories.
Oh, absolutely.
It was loud because it was interesting and it was singular. And you had all these like disciples behind Axie Infinity, which you've still got some of them. Whereas now we're seeing success cases. I wrote an article yesterday about this. We're seeing incredibly impressive success cases of blockchain games. Nobody's talking about them. I don't see anything written about them. Now and again, a little news piece, PR, but no big outlets are talking about it. For example, the one I wrote about yesterday is Mythical Games. So NFL Rivals is officially licensed NFL game, kind of the spiritual successor to NFL Blitz, which is a very old game, arcade NFL game, it was really good fun. So they launched that on Apple and Android. It's had over 2 million downloads. It's had 15 million games. It was the number one sports game on Apple. It was Apple's game of the week last week. It's doing things that people haven't seen with blockchain games at all. It's absolutely unprecedented.
Yep.
You cannot tell the things you own at NFTs. All it says is why does... So they tweeted this. They said, why does NFL have its own marketplace, the Mythical Marketplace? And they just say, you can do P2P trading. You can sell your stuff. You can buy other cards. You can trade with your friends. Which is exactly right. Oh my God, like 10 out of 10 Mythical Games. You've played that exactly how it should. Exactly how Skyweaver did. And we praised them for like a year and a half ago. But the thing is, so just to add to this, my friend's a big NFL fan. So I messaged him yesterday after I wrote the article and I said, why don't you have a look at this game? Because he's a gamer as well. And I was like, have a look at this game, see what you think. He's been playing it all morning and he's like, oh, it's amazing. I love it. And then I said to him, did you know all the players at NFTs? He's like, I guess from what I said, but you couldn't tell. Like there's nothing that says NFT, that you don't realize you're holding any NFTs, but you are. This is the big difference. blockchain, NFTs, crypto tokens, they're no longer USPs. They're no longer being used as the selling point for that game, as was the case with Axie Infinity. And that's not criticizing Axie. They timed it very well, and it was a way of selling that game, and it did very well for all those reasons. But now that's gone. Now the tech isn't that new anymore. We just need to see its utility. And they've implemented it in NFL Rivals, as well as Nitro Nation, a new game which has already done 500,000 downloads. They're just killing it. Blancos is now going to mobile as well, because they've realised that mobile is where they're getting all their bread. And they are absolutely killing it, but very, very quietly. And this is the difference. Quietly doesn't attract Web3 culture. Quietly doesn't attract its own crowd. They're getting their players on merit alone, gameplay merit alone. The game's good, people are enjoying it, you can trade and sell your own cards. Awesome. Like, it's just working. But you can't have a culture around that. The culture will be NFL players and maybe gamers. Yeah. That's it. Maybe even people who collect like baseball cards or whatever. Maybe they'll want to collect the special edition, because I think they're doing special edition cards of the NFL players. So perhaps you get collectors as well. But they're not remotely appealing to crypto bros. They're not remotely appealing to Web3 gamers. I mean, they're getting some, but all the Web3 influencer, like gamer influencers I follow, I mean, there's so many I follow, like Bryson, Stash, even like that Juice Squad, like KG and people. I haven't seen any of them mention NFL Rivals. And it's number one. Like, let's not beat around the bush. It is number one for blockchain games on stats alone. I don't believe the people that are saying they're beating Mythical's numbers, and there are games that say they have 50 million players, whatever. I don't believe you. You're always very difficult to get evidence out of, and the stats don't really follow it. Whereas you can look at Google Play and see how many downloads each of their games has. Nitro Nation has been out, 2 weeks? It's got over 500,000 downloads on Google Play alone. You can see those numbers. So they're not faking anything. You can see it. But all of this success is quiet from the Web3 standpoint. So I think that's indicative of where the culture is going. There's nothing for the culture to hang on to. What are they singing about? Because the very thing they would sing about isn't singing about the thing that the Web3 gamers love. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not important to them as a company. It's just something doing its job. Like, Unreal Engine. Most games don't sing every day about how they're built on Unreal Engine. They'll go, they might say, Unreal Engine 5.3 because the graphics are amazing. But they'll say it once. They're not going to ram it down your throat, and there's not going to be an Unreal Engine 5.3 culture that's built around the game.
No. I think what I would say is, obviously, because the Web3 ecosystem as a whole has been in decline for a long time, and a lot of the people have disappeared, it doesn't make much sense for anyone who is building a game with this technology to necessarily appeal to those people, because there's not many of them left. But whilst you were talking, I just went on YouTube and looked at some of some of the crypto gaming influencers that I know and love. Some of them are still going very strong. I see Stash is still uploading.
Stash is still working
3
hard.
videos a week, which is great. On-Chain Gaming, his most recent video is titled "A Message to the Western Church." I'm not even going to try and go into what in the hell's happened to that channel.
I'm watching that straight after this.
But yeah, I mean, it's bizarre. And again, you mentioned Skyweaver. I think we said back in the day that they were ahead of the curve in eliminating any references to the technology, and it seems that they definitely were. I wonder if Skyweaver kind of re-released today, whether they would pick up a bunch of players just from the TCG crowd. I think they probably would, because the gameplay is pretty strong. But anyway, it's as you said, and I agree with you, the terms blockchain, NFT, Web3, they're not market movers anymore. They're just terms. An NFT doesn't necessarily signify something new and exciting anymore. If anything, to the general public, it signifies that something's probably a scam, which is not. Yeah,
it has negative connotations, for sure.
And which is why a lot of the games that are being built with this technology, go NFL Rivals, are just ignoring it entirely. And I'm sure that with Sony's patents on the technology, that I don't believe their patents referenced any NFT or Web3 terminology, did they? But it was
very
basically
cleverly worded.
Basically blockchain tech. And I don't think they've put that to use anywhere yet, to my knowledge. But I think whenever they do, they'll go the same route as NFL Rivals and just not reference it. And whereas if you were embedded in a very close-knit community such as WAX, such as VB, such as IMX at a particular point in time, you would argue that, there is a culture here. There's plenty of people that are passionate about the platform and the marketplaces and the games, etc., etc. It's just seemed to have all ebbed away now. And that, I think some people will regard that as a negative, that, this community used to have 10,000 people in it, and now it has 20, which is probably an accurate comparison in terms of numbers for some communities. But anyway, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing if it means that, the technology, which at the end of the day is what we should all care about, is breaching into the mainstream. There are people, obviously still people in the space, that are clinging on to the idea that you can make oodles of money through investing in this one new coin that nobody's heard about. But it's nice to be seeing much less of that, and to, in the background at least, and on PR Newswire and whatever other platforms people are using now, that quietly in the background we're seeing the kinds of developments that we'd like to see. Even on like Decrypt's GG platform, GG by Decrypt, the most of what they talk about is got not a lot to do with blockchain games. I mean, their most recent article is talking about Rocket League banning item trading.
P2P, which incidentally has become a conversation about Web3.
Yeah, I mean, they've titled their article, Rocket League players revolt over item trading ban. Do NFTs fix this?
Oh, right, so they did use that angle, yeah.
Yeah, so they're trying to lean into it, but yeah, I don't know if NFTs are the answer. I mean, I guess this article is supposed to kind of lean more into people that may not know too much about NFTs, because that question as the headline, if you know much about Web3, doesn't make too much sense. Then anyway, I think it's nice to see that NFTs and Web3 are being placed into these conversations as a solution to problems, rather than, look at this crypto project that's trying to get you to spend $2,500 on some digital item. I mean, I speak as someone that bought a blockchain brawler back in the day, so
I spoke to a friend about this the other day.
I've been burned by this, so
well, it's now embargo. Never mind.
Okay, never mind.
Nearly got sued.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just a very. I've said before on this podcast, it seems like nothing's happening in the last year, but in the background, there's a lot happening. Yeah. It's just the lot of it that's happening is not exciting to everyday people, and probably to a lot of the early podcast listeners we had. If I'm being honest,
maybe.
A lot of them wanted to hear about cool new games and things they can make money off of, and that isn't happening. But behind the scenes, there's so much going on, and it's going to be an exciting 2024 ahead of us. It's weird that we can now start talking about that because it's mid-October now.
It is.
But I think I don't think all of the malarkey about SBF and FTX and other acronyms are going to go away anytime soon, because the idea that some 20-something stole 9 figures of money is appealing to media. But
of course.
I'm hoping that as Decrypt have put Web3 and NFTs into the conversation about Rocket League's changes, we're going to see more of that kind of thing as we move into next year, and more legitimate projects come to the fore. It seemed like early 2022 in particular, I was writing no end of articles about staff moving from Ubisoft and from other AAA studios and creating their own thing, and we're building this cool game. But all of them pretty much said the same thing. It's like, we're announcing we're doing this, but don't expect anything from us in the next 2 years. And hopefully we'll start to see some of those projects come to the forefront sooner rather than later, and then we'll have something a bit more positive to talk about.
Yeah, I agree. I think some people are going to would be really disappointed if Web3 culture just kind of fell away and disappeared. I'm not one of them.
Meaning,
I didn't really click with it. I don't know if it was age or what, but I mean, it wasn't age, because we used to talk to people that would say like GM every morning, and I hated it. And I felt like a lot of Web3 culture was just window dressing and getting excited about things that might move the market.
Yeah.
Now nothing is moving the market, or at least not moving it up. There's no buzz, and I think that shows that it was. I mean, this is bold. I think that shows that in a way it was a hollow culture. Because
it was 100%.
If you look at, let's look at metal music, right? So, metalheads, whether like, if all of a sudden the top metal bands were, outed as awful sex offenders, or which I'm sure has happened many times, but like if the band started taking really big hits, metalheads don't care less about metal because some of the band's gone down. Like, there's a core, there's something underneath all of the bluster. People love metal music, whereas I don't think people are like, I just love blockchain. Like, they weren't engaging with it in that way. They loved what it could do for their life in financially. They loved that suddenly they made a load of money, and that they bought a picture of a procedurally generated rabbit and it went up to like 50 grand or something. They were enjoying the fruits of it, but there was nothing underneath it. They weren't, like, for me, I got into, and I think this is true of you as well, even though we came at it originally from different angles, I liked what blockchain could do for the things I love. So initially it was gaming, but also photography. It solved a lot of problems for photographers because of digital art being impossible to sell for any real money, because you couldn't prove the provenance and everything. And then gaming, the same sort of things with items, as well as there are certain gameplay modes like extraction shooters, which we're seeing Dr. Disrespect do with Dead Drop. I could just see how it could infuse games and improve it. And that's what I found it exciting, which is why I'm still here when the hype's gone, because that hasn't changed. I enjoyed the hype. I enjoyed seeing my crypto wallet's value go up every day. But the technology was what kept me here, and has what has continued to keep me here. Whereas I don't think a lot of the people, I mean, you can tell by how quiet it is that that's just not the case anymore. Like, you throw up a GM now, you're going to get like 3 back. But you throw up a GM in the middle of 2021, and my God, like, you had 50 new friends. It was just...
It was the easiest way to gain Twitter traction ever.
Yeah.
Just 2 letters every day. There you go.
It was crazy. Like, people were so engaged with it. And really, they were all yearning for their own demise. Because as soon as it started becoming mainstream, then they're not part of this counterculture. They're not part of a niche anymore. It's just a strange time. And I just wonder what it's going to look like in a year or two, which we always wonder, to be fair. Yep. It gets to a ramps time every year, and we wonder what it will be like in a year. I imagine our predictions last year are going to be pretty rough to listen back to. But that's for December.
I'm not looking forward to that.
No. I think, if I remember rightly, I was way too positive 2 years ago. So last year I started undershooting, but I still don't think I undershot enough.
Oh God!
For it not to be embarrassing, but we'll get to that in December. But Web3 culture. The clickbaity title of "Is it dying?" Yes, but not because it's hard. It's hard to put a nice little soundbite on it, because it is dying, but it's not dying. Because
it's dying, but
it's what was underneath. It was awful, and now it's gone. It wasn't like a fad. I was just trying to think of a fad to say. The only one I could think of was Pogs. I haven't thought about Pogs in 20 years.
I mean, Cogs is a thing on Wax, so there you go. Go drop all your cryptocurrency into that.
Wow. But it was just... that's really thrown me through a loop. I need to go on eBay and buy some Pogs. Oh, God. Spend an afternoon in my garden with my Pogs.
But, Web3 culture is dying.
But it's not as severe as
thing.
That. Yeah.
No, it's not an end of days scenario. It's at least I can say it for myself. I hated Web3 culture. I don't want to be a part of it, and I think if it's gone, good riddance, because we don't need it. It's actively unhelpful. It gives the industry a bad name. It draws people into the industry that are here for the wrong reasons. And some of those people are still around that are all like, oh, hey, top 5 coins will blow up in 2024. Like, go away. Nobody wants you here. Some people do, the people that want to make money. But any of us that are actually trying to build something innovative and new and that is genuinely of benefit to people, you're not doing anything for the industry as a whole, let's say. And, whereas, yes, there's less people here. I'd like to think that the people that are still here are people that do genuinely care about the technology and not about how much their bags have gone up.
I mean, why would you be here? Why would you be here right now?
Exactly. Or unless you have like the patience of a saint and you genuinely believe that all of your Wax NFTs or Ethereum NFTs are going to be 10x what their current price is. There's no
full sunk cost fallacy. You're just never going to leave. You're going to stay on this ship until it goes under.
No, I mean, I resigned myself to the fact that all of the NFTs I bought 6 months ago are never going to go back to those prices ever again. My Cool Cat is worth less than a quarter of what it is when I bought it. I don't even want to talk about my blockchain brawler. But I mean, I think I've got several thousand Wax NFTs. None of them are worth anything remotely close to what I would have bought them for. But
it's funny if you look at Atomic Hub and you look at the trading volumes on each chain, just on Atomic Hub, it's all gaming now. It's all utility.
Oh, absolutely.
Which shows that perhaps the art NFTs really are. You may never recover that unless they're special in some way, like they have some cultural significance, which we've talked about before, such as Bored Apes. I mean, Bored Apes is also going to have utility. It already does, but it's going to have more real, like traditional utility with other side metaverse and stuff. But and like punks, I think the things that represent a milestone in history will retain value, but I think most of the generative collection is good. I hated them at the time. I said this at the time. Why are you buying into it? I understand why they're selling it. I don't know why you're buying it. But the gaming stuff, I mean, who knows? That may end up going up.
I think gaming, loyalty, and entertainment are probably the new trifecta for where blockchain is heading.
Entertainment is a good call as well.
Yeah, I think art and photography, there's very specific scenarios where it could be helpful. I think it's just one of ones. Like if you're a photographer if you're a well-known photographer and you want to sell copyright rights or some sort of exclusivity to one person to use those photos, then sure, turning your photos into NFTs is a way of doing that and a way of providing provenance on the blockchain. But
it's not going to spark a bull run.
No, it's definitely not in the situation where you can just create something on Paint and start selling it for $100, which it seems weird to think that 2 years ago that's the position we were actually in. But
I thought it was weird when it was happening. We were pretty vocal about the bad collections making money. I remember do you remember the GameStop marketplace launching? Me saying to you, at least 6 of the top 10 collections on the first day were AI generated.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
I mean, people didn't have access to it was all done on Dolly 2, I think.
Dolly 2, yeah, probably.
People didn't have access to it, or it wasn't as big as it is. Like now everyone knows AI image generation, but back then it wasn't. But still, just complete rubbish selling for, I think I've still got something on there. I don't even know if I can get it out anymore. It's dead. But
well, I think one of my final points on the art front is, I'm sure I would have said this back in 2021 and many other people will have done too, is that, Web3 has brought about this revival in the value of art. And, all these people that forever had, were artists and were creating great work but could get no money for it, all of a sudden have this avenue to make money. I'm probably in the complete opposite camp today, in that, thankfully, we're in a point where, because anyone can make something that looks decent with AI, those things aren't selling anymore. And I'm very thankful that that's the case. I guess I was lucky when I came into the Web3 space initially in 2021 that the artists that I did decide to buy work off of were people that were doing stuff that was actually innovative and not just, hey, I can make something on MS Paint. Stuff like Crypto Swatch, who's making animated tattoo flash. That's actually kind of cool. And it's something that's kind of innovative. And, there's some, anime style artists and stuff that are doing some really cool stuff. But now that AI has come to the fore and you can just type 3 words into Midjourney and come out with something that's better than what 95% of people can draw or create, not as many people are buying the absolute trash that was been on NFT marketplaces for years, which is a great thing in my eyes. And I think we've established more of a sense of normality and come back to a point where it's there's value attached to a meritocracy now, where if you are an outstanding photographer or an outstanding artist, then you can find value for your work, and you're not being outbid by someone who can type a few words into a generator and then stick it up on an NFT marketplace.
I think,
there we go.
Ironically, when the dust has settled, I think the digital art community may well be enriched by the advent of blockchain technology. I think when everything calms back down and we're back at the baseline, digital art still has improved by what happened, even if it was, ridiculous speculation and spikes and craziness. Once the dust has settled, you are left with a way of buying and owning digital art, because digital art has had a culture for a long time.
Yeah.
And now they've got slightly more utility to what they do. So I think perhaps that's one of the few cultures that will, given enough time, come off better off the back of Web3. But Web3 culture as a whole, not so much.
Stick in the bin.
Well, it just doesn't have a place anymore. It doesn't count. It's not opposite to anything. It doesn't really stand for anything. It's like it's like being a culture for electricity.
Sure. That's a very good way of putting it, actually.
We don't. Yeah. We love electricity. It's great, but I don't want to start a club about it.
No, I don't think many people would join if you did.
No.
But yeah, I think that was a pretty good wrap up on the state of culture right now, and well, at least in my books, thank fuck that it's disappearing. But I mean, we'll leave that.
I'm not gonna miss GM. I can tell you that.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Well, hey, if you as a listener have a different opinion on Web3 culture, then do let us know in the comments, or on Twitter @MintMorePod and all that good stuff. But until we get those angry messages from you guys, Rob, where can we find you?
I don't know if I want to say off the back of that, but you can find me at tokengamer.io for the latest blockchain gaming news. And we also talk a lot about Web3 as a whole. So perhaps that will change over the years. But really, I'm interested in talking about technologies applications in gaming. We've got some absolutely awesome interviews coming up, including one that has been in the works for about 3 months. One of the biggest games to release in 2023, and one of the people responsible for some very cool tech in that game has had a conversation with me. But we had to get it cleared by about 9 different people. Oh my God, the corporation, I can't name anything, but the corporation that controlled this game, whoa, they are not easy to work with. They are very, very stressful. Anyway, there's a lot of very interesting interviews coming, so keep an eye out for that. Little side point news. We are no longer a block producer. Token Gamer is no longer a block producer of Wax. TokenGamer.io is going nowhere. Token Gamer as a whole is going nowhere. I'm going nowhere, and unless unforeseen acts of God. But we're not a block producer anymore. There isn't some big drama or story really behind it. It was becoming less viable for us to do, and we were having to spend a lot of time on it. And obviously, with crypto markets down, it doesn't pay as much as we needed to really carry on growing in all directions. So, that's the people in the guild public might have already seen it. But we're going nowhere. We're just not a block producer for Wax anymore. But Wax has still a full roster and people in the wings waiting. So it doesn't affect Wax in any way, shape or form. And we still like Wax. Anyway, John, where can people find you?
Your point about getting an interview cleared reminds me of so many interviews I did over my time at NFT Insider that I had to throw in the bin because particular people wouldn't clear particular people to say particular things. And so I commend you for spending 3 months on getting an interview out. But there we go. For me personally, it is at Hydropowered, HYDROPWRD on pretty much everything. Twitter is the best platform. Right now, I'm still looking for new opportunities. So, if you're looking for content, community marketing, biz dev, etc. in Web3, then pop me a message. I'm more than happy to have a chat. In the meantime, I'm building Top Splits, which is my YouTube channel for all things racing games and sim racing. I've been doing a lot of Forza-related content with the Forza Motorsport reboot release. So I've been making a lot of people angry with some clickbaity video titles, which is perfect. But we've got plenty more on the way. And yeah, that's pretty much all from me. So thank you very much for watching episode 82 of the Mint One podcast. Once again, if you're on YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe. If you're on Apple or Spotify, a 5-star podcast review would be great. And you can follow us on Twitter at Mint1Pod. Thank you very much for tuning in, everybody. And we hope you tune in again next week.